Hello class! Today we are going to review factoring trinomials from 2.3. So last time in 2.2 we looked at factoring when you have 4 terms in your polynomial, but what do we do if there are only 3 terms? So that's what we're looking at today. So what we're going to do is first you always want to see if even though there are 3 terms, is there a greatest common factor in all 3 terms? If so, take that out first. If there's not, we are going to find a way to split the middle term into 2 new terms. So you're going to start out with 3 terms in the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are just numbers. And we're going to find 2 numbers that we can use to split b into 2 new terms. And there are specific steps that we follow to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to take the first number a and the last number c, and we're going to times them together. And we're going to see what 2 numbers multiply to be that number, but add to be the middle number b. So we're looking for 2 numbers, m and n, that when I times them equal a times c being timesed. But when I add m plus n, it equals that middle number. So right now that might seem kind of confusing, but when I show you how to do it, it makes a little bit more sense. And then once we find what those numbers are, we're going to split or rewrite this trinomial with 3 terms into 4 terms. So we're taking that bx and writing it as mx and nx so that we have 4 terms. And then once you have 4 terms, you can do your 2 groups of 2 and follow the factor by grouping that we did last time. So let's look at some examples and it will make more sense. Okay, so first example, we have a trinomial here in the form 2x squared minus 11x plus 5. So first you want to see, is there a greatest common factor between all 3 things? Well, 2, 11, and 5, they don't have anything in common, so there's no common factor, so we're just going to skip the first step from up above. Then what we're going to do is we're going to find a way to split up this negative 11x into 2 new numbers. And here's how we're going to do that. I like to write this little x table. It kind of keeps your numbers organized, I think. What you're going to do is you're going to times the first number to the last number. So 2 times 5 is 10. Okay, and so that number goes on the top of the x. And then you take your middle number b, and that goes on the bottom of the x. So this is just kind of a visual way to keep the numbers together, and I think it can help organize it. We're looking for 2 numbers that when I times them equal 10, but when I add them together equal negative 11. So factors that multiply to be 10 are 2 and 5, and there's also 1 and 10. Those are the only options that equal 10, right? We want a pair that will give us 11. We do have a negative on here though. So 1 plus 10 would be 11, but we want negative. So I'm going to do negative 1 and negative 10. And those I fill in on the sides of the x. So the reason I like to write it this way is because then I can check really quick. Negative 1 times negative 10 is equal to positive 10. But negative 1 plus negative 10 is negative 11. So we have the right combination here. So these 2 numbers that we just found are what we're going to use to rewrite that middle section. So instead of having negative 11x, I'm going to write negative 1x, or just negative x, you don't need to write the 1, and then negative 10x, which is still the same as negative 11x's, right? It's just like we're kind of splitting the pile into 2 smaller piles. We're going to keep the 2x squared in the front, and we're going to keep the plus 5 in the back. But now, by splitting that 11x into 2 new things, we have 4 terms that we can split into 2 groups of 2. And if you remember from our lesson last time, whenever that third term is negative, like we have here, we want to make sure to bring that negative in with the number so that when we do our factoring, we get our signs correct. So once we have your 2 groups, it turns into pretty much what we did last time. You're going to take the common factor out of each group. So if I look at 2x squared and x, there's no number that they share, but I could take 1x out from each of them. That goes in the front, and then whatever's left over goes on the inside. So if I take an x away from 2x squared, there's 2x left. And if I take an x away from x, it's like there's a 1 there. And if I repeat over here, the common factor for negative 10x and 5 is 5, but we need our signs to flip. In order to match the insides of this one, we have a positive negative. Right now I have a negative positive. So I'm going to take out a negative 5, because when I take a negative 5 away from negative 10, it leaves me with a positive 2x. And negative 5, when I take it away from a positive 5, leaves me with a minus 1. And that way we have a 2x minus 1 and the insides match. So that's kind of your check to make sure you did it right. So since the 2x minus 1's match on the insides, we are ready to just write our final answer. So you're going to take one of these. Think of now factoring out this group. That's your common factor, the 2x minus 1. And then the leftover x and the leftover minus 5 go in their own group. And that is your answer. So that is how you factor with a trinomial. So once you get to here, it's the same as last time. You just need to do this additional step to split that third or that middle number into two new numbers. So let's look at another one. Okay. So we have 3x squared plus 8x plus 5. I'm going to draw my little x table here. First thing you do is you times the first and the last number. So 3 times 5 is 15. That's going to go on the top. And then the middle number goes on the bottom. And then you're going to start thinking what two numbers multiply to be 15 but add to be 8. So 3 and 5 are going to work, right? 3 times 5 is 15. 3 plus 5 is 8. So those go on the sides. Those are the two numbers we take. So we're going to split up the 8x into a 3x and a 5x. And don't forget to put the x on it. Sometimes I have people just accidentally just writing the 3 and the 5. We're splitting up x's, so I need to have that included. This is going to be 3x's and 5x's, not just 3 and 5. Bring down the 3x squared. And then bring down the 5. And now we have 4 terms. There's technically a plus there. But then we can do our two groups of 2 and start taking out our common factor. So if I look at this first group, they both have a 3 and at least one x we can take out. So we're going to take out a 3x. If I take 3x away from 3x squared, there's just one x left over. If I take 3x away from 3x, it doesn't just go away, there's a 1 left over. So don't forget to put a 1 there if you take everything out. Then on this one, 5x plus 5, we can just take a 5 out. And that leaves me with 1x left over for 5x when I take the 5 away. And 5, when I divide it by 5, leaves a 1. And those two insides match, so we're good. So to write your answer, you're going to take the x plus 1 to the front. Think of factoring this out now. And then the 3x and the 5 go inside their own group. And you're done. Hey, let's try another one. Hey, for x squared plus 5x plus 4, there's not a number written in the front here, but it's a 1. So again, first step is we're going to do 1 times 4. And that goes on the top of the x. And then the middle number 5 goes on the bottom. And we're thinking what two numbers when I times them equal 4, but add to be 5. Well, the numbers that multiply to be 4 are 1 times 4 or 2 times 2. Well, 1 times 4, when I add it, 1 plus 4, that equals 5. So that's the group that we want to pick. So I'm going to take a 1 and a 4. That's going to split up your middle term so that you have 1x. I'm just going to leave it as an x. And then a 4x. Don't forget the x again. And then we keep the first part, the x squared, and we're going to keep the 4. And again, you don't need to write the 1s. You can if you want, but most people don't. So I'm just going to leave them off. Now we take our common factors out of each of the two groups. So for x squared and x, we can only take 1x away. So that goes out front. If I take x squared and divide it by x, that leaves 1x left over. And x divided by x is 1. So that goes on the inside. For 4x plus 4, we can take a 4 out. So 4x divided by 4 is x, and 4 divided by 4 is 1. So the insides match. They're both x plus 1. That means we did it right. So now to write our answer, you're going to take one of the matching parts, x plus 1, and then the leftover pieces go on the inside of the new parentheses, x plus 4. That's your answer. Let's do another one. got some m's this time, but it works the same way. We have m squared plus m minus 6. So again, there's a 1 here and a 1 here. We just don't write them. But I'm going to multiply this first number 1 times the number negative 6. So 1 times negative 6 is negative 6. And then that middle number 1 goes down here. So whenever there's a negative, just be careful with your signs that you're not getting your signs wrong. But we want to think of numbers that multiply to be 6 first. So there's 2 and 3 and 1 and 6. I want to pick the pair that can give me 1. But I do have a negative in here, which means one of the numbers need to be negative. So if I look at 1 and 6, if I do like negative 1 and 6, that gives me 5, or 1 and negative 6 gives me negative 5. That one's not going to work. But if I do 2 and 3, if I make this a negative 2, negative 2 plus 3 is 1 like I need it. But negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. So this one will work. So again, I like to write it like this so I can just double check. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. Negative 2 plus 3 is 1. So those are the right numbers. So just be careful when you have a negative in there that you're getting those right. But we're going to split up the 1m to be a negative 2m and a 3m. And it doesn't matter the order here. You could flip this and do the 3m here and the negative 2m here. It's going to work both ways, which is nice that you don't have to worry about that. Bring the m squared down, bring the negative 6 down, and now we have our 4 terms, so we can split into 2 groups of 2. So now we just take out the common factor. For m squared and negative 2m, we can take an m out. M squared, when I take an m away, you have 1m left over. Negative 2m divided by m is negative 2. And then for 3m minus 6, 3 is in common. So I'm going to take a 3 out. 3m divided by 3 is m. Negative 6 divided by 3 is negative 2. These match. We have m minus 2, m minus 2. So your answer will be m minus 2 times m plus 3. And you're done. And let's do one more. Okay. So far, all the ones we've looked at haven't had this happen. Where when you first start off, the 3 terms actually have a common factor. So when this happens, you do want to take that common factor out first. But that's actually a nicer thing for you, because if we look at these numbers right now, 8, 26, and 20, those are all pretty big. If I do 8 times 20, that's 160. So we would have to start thinking of numbers that multiply to be 160 but add to be 26, which would be kind of a pain in the butt to do. So it's actually in your favor to take that greatest common factor out first. So if I look at 8, 26, and 20, they're all even, so I know I can at least take a 2 out. 4 would go into 8 and 4 would go into 20, but 4 doesn't go into 26. So the biggest number we can take out is a 2. So we're going to take that 2 out first. And now it's like we're just dividing each of these numbers by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4, so we get a 4b squared. 26 divided by 2 is 13. And 20 divided by 2 is 10. So we're just going to keep this 2 out in the front. A common mistake I see students make with ones like this is sometimes they'll forget this 2 and they'll start factoring this inside, and by the time they get done and have all their work, they forget about the 2 that they started with. So make sure you don't forget about this guy. But now the numbers are going to be a lot more manageable because I'm going to still times the first and the last number, but I would much rather do 4 times 10 than 8 times 20. So they made our numbers smaller and easier to work with. So I'm going to do 4 times 10, which is 40, and that goes on the top. The middle number, 13, goes on the bottom. And now I'm thinking, what 2 numbers times to be 40 add to be 13? Well, multiples of 40 are 2 and 20. We could do 4 and 10. There's 8 and 5. 2 plus 20 is not 13, so that one doesn't work. 4 plus 10 is 14. It's close, but not quite there. 8 plus 5 is 13. So those are the numbers we want. So 8 times 5 is 40. 8 plus 5 is 13. And you guys will get to the point where you don't need to write the numbers out like this. If it helps, go for it. But if not, just feel free to just do it in your head if you can. So that's kind of the goal, is to be able to do it in your head. But we find those 2 numbers. and we're going to use that to split up the middle 13b. So I'm going to do 8b and 5b, and then bring the 4b squared down and the plus 10 down. But now we have our 4 terms, so I can do my 2 groups of 2. But again, we need to make sure not to forget this guy when we write our final answer. So the first group, 4b squared plus 8b, 4 goes into both numbers, and I can also take a b out. So we're going to take 4b out. 4b squared divided by 4b is 1b. 8b squared divided by 4b, or sorry, just 8b divided by 4b is 2. Repeat the process. What goes into 5b and 10, and that would be 5. So 5b divided by 5 is 1b, and 10 divided by 5 is 2. We have the b plus 2's, which match, so we're good. So for my answer, I have 1 of the matching pieces, and then the 4b plus 5 goes on the inside. But again, we can't forget this little guy. The 2 needs to still come down here, and that goes just in the front. So that's what happens when there's that greatest common factor first. We want to make sure to take it out. But again, that's going to be in your best interest because the numbers will be smaller, and it's going to be a lot easier to do this part with smaller numbers than if we had kept the 8 and the 20 and the 26. So your homework, though, is just going to be on Math Excel 2.3, so go ahead and log on and get started with that. And if you guys have any questions, let me know. You can send me an email. Hope you guys are doing well. See you later.